um, got a camera series. Or what I like to do is do a little bit of interactive stuff today, but don't freak out. I'm not going to ask you to stand up, but I am going to ask you to move as I go through things, just so that you can feel what I'm trying to say on the skeleton. Okay. So typically, what I would do is go through distal to proximal. I would start at the wrist, hammer home the wrist, elbow radial, but there's so many confusions that can happen with all three of these articulations and the shoulder that I want to kind of introduce them all three together. Because if you can understand what each can and can't do, then I think it'll better clarify when things are working either individually or with each other. It does get confusing sometimes, okay? So if you can follow along, your wrist joint, okay, right here, it's a biaxial. It moves about 2 axes. It moves in 2 planes. In the wrist case, it's sagittal in front, and it's going to have 4 motions. What the wrist joint does not do, so if you follow along, we're in anatomical position, you can go into flexion and extension. So flexion and extension, okay? I just want you to see and feel where this is happening. We have 2 different forms of deviation. So frontal plane motion. We don't refer to it as ab and ad, even though I think could be a case to do it. And I think it's because your fingers ab and ad, and that's like this, and then this, and then this. It's a lot of advances. So we say ulna and radial deviation. That's not important right now. What's important is for you to be able to feel that this is happening right here. Okay, so we have this motion in the fetal and out of fetal. That's wrist. And you notice this was the bilateral axis. I wasn't just like this wrist, like a caveman, a Delcam caveman. Bilateral axis, flexion, extension. Anterior, posterior axis, ulnar and radial deviation. What the wrist does not do, this is the most important part of this section. The wrist does not twist. This is not wrist motion. This is forearm motion that we're going to refer to as radial ulnar joint. I'm going to show you how that works, but I want you to conduct one last little experiment. You can, what we call active is what you can do. Passive is what someone can do on you, or gravity can do on you. And then resistive is when you give a muscle resistance against. So actively, we can all do this. Passively, meaning relax all the muscles in your wrist, and you can take your wrist through that range of motion. But what you cannot do, if you secure your forearm up against your thorax and you don't allow your forearm to twist, you can't take your wrist and spin it. Go ahead and try. You can't spin your wrist. You can't take this joint and spin it like a balloon animal. Does that make sense? And there's a reason for that. Guys, you have ridiculous number of nerves and vessels that run into this. You've heard of carpal tunnel syndrome. There's an area in here called surgical no man's land that the only people that go into there are the top 0.0001% of resurgence. The wiring in here, and that's so that we have all these intricate dexterity type movements of all these fingers. That takes a lot of nerves. And I'm not talking like in general. It takes a lot of ratio of nerve to fibers to be able to do these little dexterous things. And all of that wiring runs through here. So it makes sense. We don't want to take the wrist and twist it like a balloon animal, because we'd be twisting all of the plumbing and all the wiring that run through these little tunnels. We want to protect that. We want to keep this straight. Here's another proof that the wrist doesn't twist. This is the anterior part in anatomical position. This is like the front of my hand. This is the dorsum of the back. But when I rotate my forearm, you still see both fronts. You don't see,
What I mean by that is this is the back of my hand and the back of my forearm. I'll try it this way. When I do this, you see the front of my hand and the front of my forearm because both of them moved. Does that make sense? So the wrist doesn't twist. I know, like in pageants and layman's terms, elbow, wrist, wrist. I mean, that's not wrist. And so, like, once again, another example of how common verbiage in our everyday lives gets brainwashed into us to think that this is wrist motion, like a transverse plane wrist motion. Okay. So the wrist. Now we have the elbow and the radial ulnar joint. The elbow is our classic hinge, flexion extension, doing the curls, flexion extension. It's articulated with the distal humerus and the ulna. That's the easiest of the three. The hardest one, maybe in this class, based off of previous students struggling with it, but the more you practice and the more you work at it, the easier it'll get, is the radial ulnar joint. And the radial ulnar joint is exactly what it infers. The radius rotates about the ulna. It wraps and it unwraps. And I'm going to teach you a bunch of landmarks to use to figure out if I'm wrapped, unwrapped, or semi-wrapped. I'm going to teach you these landmarks. The function, the purpose of the radial ulnar joint is literally to get your functional circle of grip. It's a practical range of motion concept where you can work with your hands up and in a blink of an eye, work with your hands down. That's your radial ulnar joint. That's literally the radius wrapping or unwrapping about the ulna. And when the radius does that, because the wrist bones articulate with the distal radius, when the radius flips, all of that stuff goes along with it. In other words, anterior radius, anterior carpal bones, wrap, anterior radius, anterior carpal bone. The motions of the radial ulnar joint are pronation and supination. But guys, it has zero to do with supination. In fact, that's probably one of the Brian. I have no problem in introductory classes saying supination is when you make a supine. But that is by far not the only position you should be in your body. And so once again, Pavlov says, and it's not even about being in this position. Your brain says, when my palm is facing the ceiling, I must be supinated. Exactly. My palm can face the ceiling and I'm pronating. It has nothing to do with your palm. Why? Because joint motion has nothing to do with global references. Okay. Let's talk about why these words of pronation and supination exist. we have heard before, it has nothing to do with soup. We have heard the concept of being prone or being supine, a supine position back first, right? Laying in a pine box when you get buried, you're face up. Prone is face down, prone position, right? If you've never heard these words before, that's okay. Supine, face up or face forward, prone, face down or face back. So the act of going from a supine position to a prone position is pronation. And the act of going from a prone position to a supine position is supination. So our radioulnar joint in anatomical position is in a supine position. It's face forward. This little round knob, it's like a little clock that rotates like the head on a pillow would rotate if you went from prone to supine. And this little head, called the head of the radius, it's facing forward, just like everything else is facing forward in anatomical position. And when it goes from a supine facing forward position, like if I had a Sharpie, I'd draw some little eyes right here. And as it wraps, now it's sleeping on his tummy. It's going tummy down. It's going face first. Now the eyes are facing back here. Now it's in a prone position. Now, practically speaking, how that works. I mean, it happens all the time. You can be laying in your bed, lying, potato. You'd be lying in your bed and your head could stay on your pillow in the same position, but your body could flip over and your feet are now on the other side of the bed. In other words, all of your body, like a rigid link, like a bone, if we represented the radius, could be on, doesn't matter, but let's say you sleep on the right side of the bed. I'm going to try to keep everything on the right side. You're a right side bed sleeper. You go from a supine position on the bed to a prone position on the bed, and your foot goes from being on the right side to being on the left side. But your head stayed on the right side. That's what's happening here. When the radius wraps itself around the ulna, the head stays on the lateral side, but the body and the feet flip over to the medial side. Does that make sense? Supine is unwrapping. Prone is wrapping. And halfway, maybe some of you are side sleepers. What I mean by that is you don't sleep on your back, you don't sleep on your tummy, maybe you sleep on your side. We call that a semi-pronated position, halfway. Has anybody ever heard that term before? Semi-pronated position. It's a very functional position for gripping and grabbing. The reason we call it semi-pronated and not semi-supinated is because anatomical position is a supine position. So the only way to get to sleeping on your side is to have pronation. If anatomical position was prone, we'd be calling this a semi-supinated position. Make sense? Here are, and again, we're going to go, this is why I'm starting with the radioulnar joint, because this traditionally gives the students the most problems. We just got to keep grinding. Landmarks. Remember I did like ears and shoulders and chest, and thumb and pinky will always be connected to distal ulna and distal radius. And that's because the wrist doesn't twist. Because the wrist doesn't spin and it's transverse, ulna will always be pinky side, and the thumb will always be radial side. If that doesn't happen, you need to go to the hospital. pinky and ulna will always be splinted, and thumb and radius will always be splinted. Now that is good for two reasons. One is when we get into wrist motion, ulnar deviation will always be pinky side deviation towards the ulna side, and radial deviation will always be thumb. And some students are going to confuse it because I can do ulna and radial here, but I can also move my radial ulna joint and do ulna and radial here. So as long as you know it's not about a global reference, it's about did I deviate to my ulna on the pinky side? Did I deviate to my radius on the radial side? It doesn't matter the radial ulna joint position. I'm either going thumb side or pinky side. The second reason it's really important to understand these non-movable landmarks in transverse plane is when you are supinated. And supinated is one of those like the elbow and the knee. In anatomical position, you are supinated. Why? Because you can't go any further. You're at the end of your rope. I'm in a supinated position, but my wrist is not in an extended position. Why? Because I can extend from anatomical, or I could flex from anatomical. Just reminding you that every now and then we can't have a joint where we could say anatomical is extended or anatomical is supinated. You can't go any further. Here's the thumb rule. It's called the thumb rule. Why is it called the thumb rule? Because I invented it and that's what I want to call it. All right? Called the skunk rule. Thumb rule. The thumb rule says because the wrist doesn't twist and because my thumb will always be radial side, it makes sense that I could just follow the thumb as a representation of my radius as it wraps and unwraps. Meaning, when the thumb is lateral, like in anatomical position, I'm supinated. I'm unwrapped. However, when the thumb goes medial to my elbow, that's my foot swung to the other side of the bed. The thumb went from lateral to medial. I'm wrapped. I'm prone. I had pronation to get there. So lateral thumb, supine. Medial thumb, prone. In the middle thumb, I'll use like my bicep as a reference, semi-prone, meaning halfway. Lateral thumb, supine. Medial thumb, prone. Bicipital thumb, semi-prone, halfway. Guys, there's no exceptions to this shit because the wrist doesn't twist. So yes, some examples are going to be super easy. Supination, pronation, supination, pronation. But guys, some of them will be less easy. Some of them will be less easy. Some of them, eventually, we're going to get into some examples where they will be very not easy. These are not easy. These are not easy. We're going to get there, and that's why I want to teach you these landmark rules so that you can prove what's happened. This is not easy. Yes, ma'am.
So I just want clarification. So you said the thumb being lateral is unwrapped,
Correct.
medial is wrapped,
Correct.
semi, and
Semi-wrapped. So semi-pronated is like you're halfway to wrapping. Or if you're moving, you can technically say I'm halfway to unwrapping.
But it's literally the concept of the radius keeping its head in one place and then taking its body and flopping it over the ulna. And the intent is so that all of the carpal bones and thus your hand that attach to the radius flop with it. So that you can get your hand from grabbing something here And now you're grabbing something there. And then eventually, when I show you how the shoulder works, our shoulder rotation, we can get something from here with radial ulnar joint contribution and shoulder contribution, and we can do a full 360 like a possessed owl if we have to. All right, try this. Put your, if you want, and I'm not asking you to get up, put your hand on the meatiest part of your forearm. You have this little chunky meaty section called the mobile wad of 3 for these 3 muscles on the lateral side. Put your hand as much surface area as you can. All right. Now, what I would like for you to do is flex and extend your wrist. Now, you may feel some muscle stuff happening. That's actually the lateral muscles being stretched as you move, because you have muscles that function at the wrist that start on your lateral part of your elbow. So if you feel something, that's normal. Okay. Now go frontal plane, radial and the ulnar deviated. Okay. Good. Now take your hand that's palm up and flop it palm down and go back and forth. And you should literally like, whoa, I feel like a bone moving. Yeah. And like, if you can't feel it, just maybe press a little bit harder. You should feel like a bone literally rolling from your hand. That's your radius going from a supine position and flopping over and going to a prone position. The head of the radius stays on the pillow, but the body flops over to the other side. And because those carpal bones are fixed, articulated to the radius, they are going to go along for the ride. That's why your hand goes from face up to face down. But this is not that. This is not happening here. This is happening here. Cool. But this should be fun eventually. Eventually, we're going to do some really cool questions. We're going to do some really neat radial ulnar joint questions that are very illusionary. That's why this is Unit 3. The upper extremity has some significant illusions involved with it. That's because we have to have a lot more movement up here than in our lower extremity. Lower extremity still has some illusions, but nothing near the illusionary things that are happening at the radial ulnar joint. Okay. My baseball people, softball people, you have radial ulnar joint motions happening when you swing. So like when you make contact, your radial ulnar joints are going to wrap and unwrap so that you can continue on the swing. Like little things like that are happening that maybe you don't pick up on. Bang, whoop, that's radial ulnar joint. You're driving a car and you make a right-hand turn. Your radial ulnar joints are going to wrap and unwrap so that you can keep the grip of the vehicle. I'm in a semi-pronated position if I'm doing like 6-3. And if I turn to the right, my right radial ulnar joint supinated and my left pronated. Or think of it like this. I started here in a neutral semi-pronated position, right? I'm sleeping on my side. True? And then I do this. This one's unwrapped. This one's wrapped. They both started here at this and that. So there are going to be examples, I'm telling you, and I'm warning you as not as fear as it's because I care that we're going to have some freaky illusions. Like we're going to get to some questions where like I start here and I do this. Start, finish. And there was radial ulnar joint motion happening there. And your instinct is like, no way in the world. And I'm like, yes way. And I'm going to teach you how to see it. I'm going to teach you how to feel it. And more than anything, I'm trying to teach you not to assume it. And it did or it didn't. Those of you that tried it, do you see it? Can't trust landmarks in terms of a global reference. Notice every time I use landmarks, it's within other landmarks. I never use landmarks to the room. It's always landmark v landmark. Landmark v landmark. Never landmark v landmark. If we had, I love curious minds. That's what teaching's about. Check this out. Let's pretend this is, I don't have one, but let's pretend this is a spoon. And if I take the spoon and I move it, rotate it sagittally, as it rotates, you're going to go from seeing the front to seeing the back. Totally natural. So if my arm was the remote control, it's going to do the same thing. You're going to go from seeing the front to seeing my back. See the front? Now you see the back. But when I did this, you still see the front. If I didn't move my radio ulna joint, you would have seen the back. So I started out unwrapped and I ended wrapped. And the only way that can happen is to have pronated or the radio ulna. I pronated so that the front of the remote control, okay? I pronated so that the front of the remote control could stay facing forward. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you said you went this way, this. Okay, just in, this is the same way.
How does Superman fly? Like palms down, right? Superman doesn't fly like this, right? Superman's like Superman flies palms down.
Right.
So if Superman starts here and all he did was flex his shoulders,
Okay. Okay, here's how the circulation is built. Okay.
where do you start? And listen to the things that I keep saying over and over. Where did you start? Where did you finish? How did you have to move to get there? Sometimes these motions are really tough to see. But if you know where you started and you know where you finished, then you can not assume, but infer through that data how you had to move. And that's what I'm hoping you guys take from this class. Because we won't all have slow motion video at work. We won't all have we have our eyes, and our eyes are untrustworthy. That's through science. Our eyes can only process so many frames per second. John Cena, thank you. We have to be able to use context clues to figure out some of these things that are happening. That's what I'm trying to give you your money's worth. Okay? So with this example, and this is a tough example, where did I start? I know I'm unwrapped because my thumb is lateral. Thumb rule. But when I finished, that is my medial epicondyle. My thumb is now medial. My thumb is on the inside. If I stayed supinated, this is what it would look like. Because as I abduct, my shoulder has to externally rotate. We'll get into that eventually. I'm just trying to show you that if I stayed lateral, if I stayed supinated, it would look like this. The pronation is what kept my hand facing forward. No different than my right transverse cervical is what kept me looking forward. It's the same thing, just applied to a different body part.
So what height of the
Right. Or unruffing.
It's a great question. Okay. Start right away. Because if I'm here, I'm halfway. I'm semi. So the radial ulna joint is moving with the shoulder to cancel the shoulder's rotation out. So it's gradual. It's definitely not like, right? It's gradual, and that's why it's hard for us to see it, because it's barely happening. I'll give you another one that's freaky. And my intent by giving you these freakies, well, it's Halloween, so that's kind of cool. But it's to be real, be honest, and to plant these seeds of these motions that, man, I didn't think about it and know how often that radial ulnar joint is helping our functional circle. I'm sure several of you have done an upright row exercise in your life, okay? I'm starting here, I am prone, right? I'm wrapped. Unwrapped, wrapped. We're good? Okay. In this position, functionally, my fingers are on the bar, under the bar, and I'd sure like to keep it that way. But as I bring the bar up using my shoulders and my scapula, if I stayed prone, this is what would happen. You want me to prove that I'm prone? That's flying away. So if I stay prone, this is what happens. If I want to keep my fingers under the bar throughout the pull, I have to have supination during. It's hard to see, and it's gradual. But my thumb, instead of seeing it looks like it's moving and it is, what's happening is, let's see, make sure I have it right. So I'm here, so I'm going to go. You see how it's moving on the closer end? Watch. So the thumb is medial, yes? Thumb is now lateral. Don't freak out. We're going to practice this. I'm giving you like the most extreme examples to chew on so that I can go over them in more detail. You've been introduced to it, and it'll make this seem that much easier. Okay? So let's play a quick review game. I want you to identify wrist, elbow, or radial ulna. Okay? Wrist. Okay? What about this? Radial ulna. I could see how it'd be tempting to say maybe wrist, right? You know, the whole thing's going somewhere. But my whole elbow is going somewhere. That doesn't mean I have elbow joint motion. Okay? Elbow. Okay. I'm going to give you one, I say confusing, one, let's say it's more advanced question for the day. Okay. Here we go. Here's my start position. Feel free to take a picture if you wish. Okay. Ready? Start, finish. Did I ever tell you what when I do this, that's me shaking the Etch-a-Sketch, like to start all over. Start, finish. Here's the lesson. I'll do it as many times as I need, but here's the lesson. human movement happens a lot of times faster than what our eyes can process. That's why magicians have jobs, because they're moving things faster than our eyes can process. However, if you use the tools that I'm giving you, where did he start? And no matter that it was fast, where did he end up? I know how he had to get there. Okay? Start. I know I look like a red Oompa Loompa, but I was trying to show some UL homecoming pride, but then it's late and the lights are out and I'm getting dressed at 3:30 in the morning and I just look like a strawberry. I feel like in woo. Remember that from Derry? Cloudy with a Chance of Meatball. In woo. All right, here we go. Start, finish. Of the 3 joints that I introduced you today, where was there not significant motion? Elbow. Elbow. Meaning I didn't this, right? All right. Give it a couple more minutes of thought. Now, next part. If you're willing, this is for educational purpose, this will help you, I promise, but you don't have to. Share with your neighbor, and it can be on the secret, if you're embarrassed. Share with your neighbor what you think happened, and see if your answers match up. See if y'all are saying the same thing, because that's really where learning can happen, where y'all have different answers, but then you're trying to explain why you have your answer. They're trying to explain why they have their answer. And sometimes you can make those connections where, oh, you're right. I see that now. Start here, palm facing the ceiling. Finish here, palm facing the floor. Just know that this example has nothing to do with palms and ceilings and floors. I'm just giving a reference to help you see where I started and where I finished. Okay? Sorry, I keep forgetting. The example we're doing right now in class is I start here and I do this. Start, finish. So if you want to pause the video to give it some thought, I start palms facing up, finish palms facing down. Start, finish. Starting to cramp my foot. Who's feeling confident enough to risk an A to an F that you got this one right? Yeah, you get it right, you get an A. You get it wrong, you get an F. Except super fast. So watch. I'm going to do it 10. Watch this, guys. I've been practicing. I'm going to do it 10 times in a row. You want to see it again? You want to see it again? So that's like the status of that joke. So my son beat me in. I mean, he always dominates my wife and I at Smash Brothers. And the youngest gets beat by the oldest, so the youngest wants us to play so that we can get smashed. And one time they were fighting, and I was just like hiding. Like I was just like, I don't want no part of that. And so they kind of beat each other up, and I just came and swooped in and knocking him out. They're like, oh, Dad, and I was just like, and then my oldest son's just like, rematch, and I was like, nah, Barbara. Bad. All right, guys, we analyze motion how? Joint by beautiful joint. Boy, that sounded Willie Nelson and Snoop Doggish. What moved We said the elbow didn't. What moved? Wrist, I think, and radial ulna. So what do you want to analyze first?
Where's the first?
Which one's alphabetical? All right. Radial ulna's first alphabetical. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, here's my start position. This is for the, I'm trying to remember the video. It's a radial ulnar joint position. Am I wrapped or unwrapped? Is my thumb lateral or medial? Is my thumb, don't tell me wrapped or unwrapped then. Tell me if it's my thumb on the outside of my elbow or on the inside of my elbow. It's on the outside. So if it's on the outside, am I wrapped or unwrapped? Unwrapped. I'm in a supine position. And my radial ulnar joint has nothing to do with my wrist. I could bring my wrist back to anatomical. I could bring my elbow back to anatomical. Doesn't affect my radial ulnar joint. Does everybody understand? I mean, my radial ulnar joint is in anatomical position. Then I did this. Now is my thumb wrapped or unwrapped? Wrapped, it's on the medial side. My radial ulnar joint has nothing to do with my wrist. My radial joint has nothing to do with my elbow. So at the end of the day, I went from here to there. That's what my radial ulnar joint saw and felt. My radial ulnar joint doesn't see all this extra flair. My radial ulnar joint was like, dude, you started here and you ended there. Start, finish. Now, let's go to the wrist. What is the starting position of my wrist? Flexed, extended, or anatomical? Okay. Is it more in fetal or less in fetal? Follow the fingers, guys. Follow the fingers. I am extended right here. This would be flexed. Okay. I'm in an extended position. Does anybody have a question of why? We're good? Start. Maybe I stay extended. I don't know. Finish. Whoa, now I'm actually in fetal. I went from an extended position where I feel the stretch in the front part of my hand to a flexed position. Now I feel the stretch in the back. Because this is what happened, guys. This is what happened. When I did this, this is what happened. Or it's just they happened at the same time. We did this silly thing last time. Is the same as. Is the same as. So from here to there is the same as bang, bang. From here to there is the same as bang, bang. You see how it should be comforting to know that if you do the where am I at, where did I go, you don't have to be held accountable for all this fast stuff. Nobody should. We shouldn't be able to see things that are blurry to our vision, but we should be able to pick up on landmarks and where are you at, where did you go, and how did you have to move to get there. Cool? All right, guys, have a safe homecoming weekend.